So please welcome Karen Lopez.
Thank you. So I never know what to put for a title when you're self-employed, right? You're president, you're CEO. Data evangelists kind of reflect what I'm doing lately. And this presentation is a DevOps-focused one on one I've been giving a lot lately about data security and privacy. I've been talking about data security and privacy for most of my career, which on this slide says 20 plus years, because once you get this old, you stop counting, right? Sorry. It's actually closer to 35 years I've been working in the data management thing. I'm one of those wacko weird people that actually started studying data management, stayed in the career, and stayed all the way through. I tell people I was born this way, being so focused on data. I'm a space fan, and I want you to love your data, and I especially want you to love your space data. Don't forget that. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in data platform. That means that I'm going to be talking about some SQL Server features, but mostly as an example of what commercial databases and even open source databases can do to help you protect data. I'm also a VMware expert, which means sometimes I play with infrastructure. Oh, and it also mentions that I'm a NASA Datanaut. That's a volunteer program that right now is on hiatus as NASA waits for the current administration to decide whether they're supposed to be going to the moon or to Mars next, because I know it just recently changed back. So the people who run that, who are data scientists at NASA, they offer this program that lets 50 people twice a year come into a volunteer class situation that's all done remote. You learn about NASA open data and their processes for working with open data, and you get to learn R and Python and all the other data science-y things so that you too can have the sexiest job on the planet. So I want to know who you are. So how many people consider yourself a developer, primarily? Primarily an IT pro? Primarily a business analyst, data architect, data modeler? Yeah, see, I'm always alone. Oh, you? Perfect. Yeah.
I used to be that.
Oh, okay. And then you fell off the wagon. Yeah, okay. You fell off the wagon. That's great. Anybody here a manager? No? Okay, we have pictures. That's for you. And how many people just never raise their hand when... How many people just never raise their hand when the speaker asks you to raise your hand? Come on, come on. Yeah, exactly. Good, that helps me. So why do I talk about this topic? Well, I'm Data Chick on Twitter. I'm a data evangelist, and because we all love our data, right? The data we steward and your own data. Oh, look, there's a space pic. So let's get ready to go. So about this session. So normally my style is really interactive. So the way we're going to play this, because it's being recorded, is instead of waiting for everyone to get the mic, if you have a short, quippy statement, you say it loud to me, and I will repeat it, because I've got questions for you about what you're going to do. Then, if you have a long, strutting paragraph soliloquy that you want to do, we'll send you the mic, right? And then everyone will wait for the mic to get over there. I have questions I want to ask you. There's lots of answers to them. I'm warning you again, I'm a data person, so I'm not an IT pro. I'm not a DBA either. And I know that shocks people because most people think there's only developers, DBAs, and IT pros in the world. If any of you share a story that you've heard of, it's always about another company, not the one you work for and none of your clients, right? It's about your brother-in-law's dog sitter's salon's delivery driver, right? That company. I said I use SQL Server as an example because, hey, we're at a WinOps thing and I'm an MVP. So protecting data. Like I said, I've been talking about this for a long time, but it's only recently that protecting data has actually been an exciting, okay, maybe not exciting, an important thing for your bosses. Why is that? Loud and quippy.
Security.
Security? No, but why? No, we've always had breaches, GDPR, all that good stuff, right? Now that there are actual penalties, since GDPR came along, and the California laws coming along, and the Canadian privacy laws coming along to be all GDPR-like, now there's actually non-trivial data breach things And the thing I'm waiting for as a data person, as a data evangelist, is those criminal penalties for people for really egregious data breaches. You all guys are waiting for that, right? Do y'all know what ROI is? Well, it normally stands for return on your investment. But I tell my CIOs now, I'm working on their ROI, which is risk of incarceration. So anytime you're in one of those Monday meetings where someone's going over the slides of the return of investment, should we really spend any time on the security and privacy stuff? You just pipe up with that little thing. You can say you stole it from me because I stole it from somebody else. So risk of incarceration. That's what we're going to do. But basically, what I'm going to talk about today is the importance of knowing what data you have, how to categorize it, how to protect it, monitor and assess it, and maybe some more thoughtful stuff. Also, I have way too many slides, so I'll just be talking really fast. Is that okay with you for post-lunch thing? So think about the most recent breaches. There was probably one this morning that I don't know about. What caused it? Was it hackers? No. No, what was it? Who said that? What's that? Lapses in policies. No MFA, no multi-factor. Thank you. I always think two-factor, but yeah, multi-factor. Human error? Is it an error? Is it laziness? Incompetence? Internal staff just walking away with it. Hey, I've got a story about that. I hope I have time to tell it. I actually worked at a client. I get to tell this client story because their whole industry is gone. Everyone remember the video rental business? So I worked for a very large video rental business based in the US, not the number one, the number 2 one. And they actually had a fired employee or a fired contractor get hired by another manager. He got fired for stealing network equipment, got caught red-handed, and another manager hired him back in. And then he got fired for stealing more equipment. But he wanted his company laptop back. So he came in on a Saturday night, talked the security guard into giving him a badge again because he had forgotten his badge. Then he went in and just started unhooking servers and networking equipment, got a big cart, a big trolley. The security guard held the door open while he pushed it out at 2 a.m. on Saturday night. How do we know this happened? The security guard sold the security tapes to the local TV station, and that's how we found out about it. And by the way, the company didn't know that the stuff was gone until the police had found it in a raid on his house for another theft. And they had no idea what data was on those servers. No idea at all. So their official statement legally was there was no PI, no personally identifiable information. They had no evidence that there was any personally identifiable information on those servers or on any of that media. That was a great time to be in security. What about the other one? I think the most common, so what's the number one vulnerability in all applications for breaches? SQL injection. It's been number one for what, 25 years? We still can't get it right. Why is that?
PHP?
What's that?
PHP?
Yeah, so PHP, but no, it's because we don't do proper vulnerability assessments for SQL injection. Still, after all these years, it's number one. But I have a prediction, and I don't know if anyone's measuring this. I think the number one is what I call open buckets, where people take data and put it into, they always blame it on S3, which, you know, as a Microsoft fan, that makes me happy. But it could be any of us, right? Most of the most familiar breaches that have been happening lately, it's because someone has put things put data unprotected in an open online storage thing, whether it's Dropbox or AWS or Azure, that's what they've done. What's the most embarrassing breaches, though, that you just kind of cringe because it wasn't a hacker using sophisticated tools, besides the open buckets? Phishing. Oh, like spear phishing and all that other stuff. Well, that's the human factor. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, and that's the hardest one to do for. Any of them specifically as a developer that you feel bad about that others have done? Buffer overflow. Oh, you can't protect against that. That's hard. No? Buffer overflow. Anything else? No?
Default passwords?
What's that?
Default passwords?
Oh, default passwords or missing passwords, right? Long ago, SQL Server's default was to install with no sysadmin password. How long ago was that? Not that long ago, right? And then really bad passwords, right? Really, really bad passwords. So, what is all this about dev and ops and data and security? Well, the reason I'm here talking about this as a data evangelist is that we data people have been kind of left out of this dev and ops and then DevSecOps, and we have developed data ops for getting our data stuff going, which I'll run right through really quickly. But generally, on the projects I've been on, where there's a really strong DevOps component, the data isn't even visible in the process. There's a database and there's files. When you guys are moving this data around or deploying this data, do you know what's inside those databases? You just guess? It's the merchandising database. That's what you know? Something like that, yeah. So, oh, this will go really quick. So I'm a data modeler, data architect at heart. That means I have a process. People have requirements. We build these beautiful data models that I send to my mom to put on her refrigerator. I do. Seriously, I do. And then we build databases and stuff, and then new requirements and whims happen that lead to requirements, and we do this. This is my cycle of deployment to get to a database. But then I have to deliver that DDL and all that reference data into the DevOps process, well, to the developers first, so they can develop against it, and then go on. So what do developers hate when they have to work with someone like me about this process? Come on. The time it takes. Bingo. What's your name? Robert. Thank you. If I had a chocolate, I'd give it to you. Anyone know what this is? That's one of my beautiful data models. 1,600 tables, 32,000 objects in it. This is an industry standard data model for the retail industry. So it covers much more than what one deployment would be, but it's an in-store for inventory, for selling, for tender auth, for everything like that. This is why it takes time. I have this saying, if you want your data model to be simple, go out and make the world simple, and then come back to me, and I'll make the data model simple. But the reason I'm showing you this, just because it's impressive, is that every one of those boxes has like this much information in it as well. And people are used to seeing, you know, primary keys and columns and foreign keys and stuff like that. But this is what makes the data model sexy to me, is all that extra metadata that I'm going to keep about it, about its security and privacy and curation and stewardship. Did you even know that stuff gets captured in a data model? No. Where are your data modelers? They all retired is what happened, because we're all pretty experienced and tired. But we have a data ops process in the data world for delivering this stuff and capturing all the stuff that, quite frankly, you guys probably don't care about if you're a developer or an IT pro or an infrastructure person. And that's okay with me, because you've got lots of diagrams I don't care about. Did I say that out loud? I used my out loud voice, yeah. Okay, so we have these models that we want to do these things in, and we want to capture where the security requirements are here, long before we've built the database. Doesn't that make sense? You don't want to spend your time. Did you know that under US HIPAA legislation, so the healthcare data stuff, that the special meal you request on a plane can be HIPAA compliant issued data? Because it's medical, sometimes medically necessary meals, right? Do you want to spend your time researching all those little pieces of data to find out that? No, data people love that. We love this stuff. We love those things. So some normal conflicts in the DevOps world: developers versus data quality. Anyone want to fight me on that? You want data quality, but not as much as the data people want it, right? Developers, you want to develop fast. That's what you're paid for. That's what you're punished for not doing. That's what you're promoted for. Data people are rewarded, measured, compensated for data quality, and not for doing it fast. This is an internal conflict that management created for us. Do you agree with that? Just say yes. Yeah, there you go. Then there's data professionals versus development speed. I don't know how to fix that except to tell you to hire data professionals that know how to continuously deploy, who know how to do test-driven development, that know how to do model-driven development, and understand the full process of getting from a data model to a database to production. Then there's the whole data versus code. Should we put requirements in the database, or should we implement them in the application code? What do you think I vote for? The database, right? And I'm going to talk about that. Then this whole concept of data versus metadata. If you're building an application, you're not using the metadata. Metadata is there for people unless it's configuration data. And as we go from software-defined stuff, which I believe is misnamed, we don't have software-defined storage. We don't have software-defined networks. We have data-defined storage. We have data-defined networks. Think about that. It's not software that's defining it. Software is implementing this configuration data for those things. So I'm glad Pumila talked about governance, because this is my data governance positions on how we protect data in DevOps. We should do all the data security and privacy requirements we can as close as possible to the data level. And I'll show you some examples why. We should use data models and catalogs to capture these needs and to even specify how they need to be implemented. We design security and privacy right from the start. We measure and monitor those things. And that's all part of governance, whether it's governance of infrastructure. This is how we do it. So some typical DevOps security focuses. And these are just my guesses from what little I know about DevOps. Do you all do code reviews, right, for security every single time? No. At that other company, not you. Your brother's dog sitters, salons, delivery person, right? There was just someone tweeted as I was sitting out here earlier today that they were bragging about how a bot just did a pull request on GitHub, found a dependency, updated the dependency, did a push request, and then used a GIF to post the success of it. How does that make you feel about the security of that, of a bot doing all that? Does that sound good?
Was there an approval spot?
No, there was no human intervention, according to the tweet.
The bot did that.
The bot did it, yeah. Sounds like I always say the best, and insert your profession here, but the best data professional is a lazy one, right? Because we automate the heck out of everything. So is the best pull request one that's totally automated? Maybe. It depends, right? Anyway, so there's code reviews. And auditing.
That one was just updating the dependency.
Just updating the dependency, but still something unreviewed. Yeah. See, you're up to speed on this. You spend too much time on Twitter. That's what my mom would tell you. How about keys and secrets management? Is that a big deal in DevOps for breaches? So what's the kind of new and upcoming way that people get into software and data that has to do with credentials management? The breaches. This is like this one. This is where someone has checked something into GitHub with their credentials in it. Have you ever done that? Ever known you've done that? Yeah. There are people in the SQL community. There's someone who collects stuff, execution plans, stuff that you can send in to have it analyzed to a website. And I'm telling people, you sent this query in to be analyzed, and you had your parameters still in it. You could be exposing important data. There were people who were putting in, under ASP, their whole configuration thing, and with all their database connection strings and everything. And actually, some very big breaches have happened because of that. So Git and other repositories. What else? What are the security focuses during the DevOps process that you guys worry about? You just don't worry about it?
Components restores.
Okay, that was 2. What?
Non-production restores from production.
Oh, I'm going to get to that. Non-production restores in production. Actually, I have another one for that, yeah?
Third-party components with weaknesses.
Verifying components with witnesses, is that what you said?
Third-party components.
Third-party compliance, yeah. Yeah.
That's one the other way round.
That's what I'm going to talk about, the one the other way around. So we'll get to that. So you guys already fessed up. You have no idea what's in that database that you just detached and reattached or backed up and restored. And where did you put the backup? And was the backup encrypted when you did all that? Who gave you the backup? Or did you just take it? The backup team? What if they think you're worrying about that stuff? Did you put it in an S3 bucket because your corporate firewall wouldn't let you move it to that other location? You just get it from the backup software. Anyone ever email around a backup, like on my team? Yeah. Email around a backup because the firewall wouldn't let them send it internally, so they sent it to their Hotmail address and then got it from there. Again, same company that's gone. I don't usually tell stories, but that company's gone. And then you've got how many pieces do you have of your applications? Of the full thing? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pieces? What data's in that? Is there XML? Is there JSON? Is the JSON supposed to be there? Did you have a developer like mine did who got tired of waiting on the data architect, so he just started stuffing data in an XML file? And I'm like, who's going to update the XML file when you're gone? And he's like, I'll do it. I'm like, fine. And what did you just post to GitHub? So discovery. So one of the things that's key in the data world is doing this data classification and categorization. You guys all do this, right? No, because you don't know what's going on in these databases. So there's basic tools out there. There's one in Azure that I'm going to talk about that just looks at the names of tables and columns and tags in files and makes a guess at whether or not it's sensitive data. That's syntax-based. There are some tools out there that are semantic-based, which some of the Azure stuff is, which means it knows that client and customer and credit card and some of these other things are kind of, same concept, different word. There are some more important ones coming from the AI world that look at both the names of your columns and the contents of your columns. You know, if you saw a column with 16 digits in it, you might guess it could be a credit card number, right? And that's called data profiling, when you use tools to look at the profile of data to guess what the data is. So there's also this concept of data curation. Sometimes it's called data stewardship, but data curation's a little bit more. It covers knowing what data you have, where it's located, how it's protected, and what categories of data they are. And I've seen it come up a lot more as the advent of GDPR and other protection things came along. But all of this comes at a cost. You're sitting there going, I don't have time to do this stuff, right? You were all thinking that, weren't you? You're going to have a data architect who does it. You guys all have data architects on your teams, right? I know you don't. Any of you? DBAs at least? Some DBAs care about this stuff, right? So it takes time, but the good thing on it, like all of these data investment things, is they build on each project so that you know that all these places where customer email address is, even though it might be in many places, you have this map to it all. So if you want to be compliant with something, I started getting phone calls around the 1st of May when GDPR was going in. Hey, we need to be GDPR compliant. Can you help us over between now and the 24th to do that? I'm like, first of all, there's no such thing as GDPR compliance, so good luck. 2, do you know all your data, where it is, who owns it, what it means, how it's protected? No. No, I can't help you, but I'll help you get started. And I'm still getting those calls, believe it or not, because you guys are all ready for GDPR, even though it's been a couple years, right? Just say yes, because there's a camera. Yeah. And we build on it incrementally, and we do this. So Azure has something called Azure Data Catalog. Anyone heard of it, used it, played with it? Oh my gosh, this is so great. Right now, it's a version 1, minimum viable product, version 1. So it's got some limitations to it, but it's a service in Azure. There's a free version that allows you to, I think have 5,000 objects in it. And by the way, 5,000 is nothing in a database. But there's a paid version that's $1 per user per month that lets you go, I can't even remember, 100,000 or something. Still too small to do it for everything in a company. But what it does is there's this little app that you install, and you run it against a whole bunch of data sources, and then you can query it, report on it, and work it with it. So like I said, there's an app. And right now, the data sources, the types of data sources it supports are the Microsoft stuff like SQL Server, SQL DB, SQL Data Warehouse, Oracle, Hadoop, DB2, Teradata, MySQL, a bunch of other stuff. And I foresee that getting added too. And you point this app to it, and it basically reverse engineers everything. And you end up with a list of all the columns. This is particularly a SQL Server one. This is AdventureWorks, so the name of the column and everything. All it's doing is reverse engineering it into a portal where you can go tag it, where you can go do things like update whether or not it's sensitive information. That's all manual in that thing. And now you have this place where you know what data you have, where it is. If your beautiful data architects and data models have already defined all that stuff, you can put that data in there. End users can put comments on it. You could go say, hey, travel meal is HIPAA compliant data. You could go do that. And that is just available via Azure. And I don't know for sure, but I know they're still working on that product. I think that's going to be, it's a very inexpensive way to get into data catalogs and data curation. I have no idea what the real pricing is once it's gone beyond version 1, but it competes with products that have been around for a couple of decades that are already, in the $500,000 price tag to license. So if you've heard of Informatica or any of these other tools that do it. So I think it's perfect now for using on your projects, just to know what the tables and columns and in your XML and everything is. And it can be used by any of these people. And there's some other options. Of course, data modeling tool is really good. So once we have these things, what can we do? Did anyone know that there is a task in SQL Server that will help you go classify the data at SQL Server Management Studio? I know you're not DBAs or data folks so much, but right in SQL Server Management Studio, if you go to your database, go to tasks, from down, go to data classification, it will do something like this. And it's making a guess. So the schema is sales, the table is credit card ID. It guessed that it was a credit card and what the security label is. And right now, the security labels that you can put to it are things like this, and right? It makes that guess just based on the syntax. And I did not create this. This is not good Spanish. A co-presenter of mine created this because he went and looked up what the Spanish word for card was, and then he came up with this horrible name of Tarjeta Crédito ID. So it works in multiple languages as well, in case you support databases in other languages. This will help you go find sensitive data. And it's probably an 80-20 rule thing where it gets 80% of the easy stuff and the other 80% of your time you're going to be spent getting this. But the fact that people don't know what's in a database is going to lead us to data breach things because we can't even properly protect it. So this is in SQL Server Management Studio, and it's created in it. And it'll allow you, once you classify things, to produce a report, show your boss, send to your mom to put on her refrigerator. Because it's impressive, because you know it's impressive because it has donuts in its graphs. So data pros spend 80% of their time sourcing, prepping, and cleansing data. That means that's another reason things take so long. It's likely everyone else has these issues. We're lousy as a profession, the whole IT profession, of knowing what data we have and how to protect it. I think if the rest of the world knew how bad we treat our data and how much we don't love their data, they'd never give it to us. And this makes me very sad. There's also Azure features that you can go use, like auditing and threat detection. Has anyone used that against your Azure stuff? Do you sleep this much better at night knowing it's doing that? Yeah. Anyone get over-detected and now you have to explain to your auditors that it's not really a threat, whatever it is? Yeah, that's a fun one too. There's a feature in SQL Server called dynamic data masking. So data masking is where you kind of mess up the data, but this feature, it's covered in the books online as a security feature. It's not a security feature. I call it a privacy feature because it only slightly protects the data. And basically what it does is It allows you to mask a credit card number with X's all but the last four, or somebody's email address, or a salary, or a date, or a name, and it has those features to it. And the way this works in SQL Server, it's a property of the column, the data mask, and you can define it custom or set it to one, like that's what happens with email, I think. But it doesn't change the data in the database. It only changes it once all the query and everything is done and it's being presented. So that's why I call it a privacy thing. It'll print out on the report that way. It will show on the screen that way. And certain users can have the rights to see unmasked data, but that would be a database user, not an application user. And this will save you from the data breaches where people left the reports on the bus, a thumb drive somewhere. It won't save you from someone walked out the door with the server because the data's not masked, it's not encryption. And just because it's good to have code in a thing, it basically, you do this as an alter or as a create of the table and say, mask it with a function email, and it'll provide a standardized mask. What I love about this, it's at the column level. It's just masked at when it's presented. It's there to complement other methods. It has very small performance impact because all the querying, all the processing has already happened, and it's only the resulting thing. There are a whole bunch of gotchas there, limitations for it. But what I love it as a data evangelist is I'm the data expert. I get to decide that credit card number must be masked all but the last four. And then every time an application goes after that data, it masks it all but the last four. I get to do the research on the data because that's what I like doing, and that frees up devs and everyone else to do whatever they want. So the reason I say it's not a security thing is if you write the right kind of query, you can figure out what the data is. So if you've masked salary to set everyone's salary to 99999, and you say, show me all the salaries that are greater than 100,000, greater than 100,000, it's going to return the whole row and say the salary is 999,000, right? So you could always guess if people had ad hoc query access to the database, you can just use math to figure out what the actual data is. It's there for presentation time. But I love it because it's one standard masking thing. I don't have to have my developers deciding that credit card numbers should be all but the first four masked and every other letter plus one and things like that. Then there's a feature called, how much time we got? Row level security. Row level security is something we always had to do in the application, and it's really hard to get it right. So this is one I'm excited about. Row level security in this particular example is when you have patients in a doctor's office and the medical staff for that patient are the only people should be able to see that data. And it's really hard to get this right. It's much harder than you think because the way we've done it in the past is either creating views on the data that say, this doctor gets to see these patients, or we had to do it at presentation time. So what happens in row level security, if I'm not allowed to see any patients, when I say select all, I see nothing. I don't see select all, oh, you've been filtered for doing this. It allows me to set a predicate, a filter, and limit access to rows of data, instances of data in a table or multiple tables. It can also be used to block write access, so you don't have the rights to write to those rows either. What's good about it is it works against owner roles as well. This isn't something that, because it's not blocking access, it's granting access. I mean, I guess you could write it as a block, but it keeps people from snooping. So you guys have all heard those stories where someone in a hospital or in Inland Revenue or something like that has gone snooping around for people's tax returns and patient things. This is what keeps that from happening. And it happens, because it's in the database, it happens for all access, right? Someone hooked up a spreadsheet or another application that didn't get the rules right, it happens all the time. My last favorite one, anyone using Always Encrypted anywhere on SQL Server? Everyone's using SQL Server, right? Just everyone say yes. Yeah. Always Encrypted stops man-in-the-middle attacks, right? And it requires a certain .NET library in your app or in your client tool. But basically, the data is encrypted at rest, it's encrypted at flight, and then it only gets decrypted at the time the data is presented. A lot of data breaches that were actually hackers are man-in-the-middle attacks. So the big target one that kind of went crazy in the States was a man-in-the-middle attack at the point of sale in a retail environment with physical hardware at the point of sale, or where they came in through the HVAC system because they didn't have segregation of their networks. They got into the payment processing and were able to read the memory in the payment processing, and it went on for years. And my favorite thing about that is the security teams, third-party security teams that monitored it all, kept raising the issue with Target, and Target kept saying, we get too many alerts, go away, go away, go away. And that went on for months before someone finally figured it out. So Always Encrypted is at the column level. It protects data at rest and in memory and in movement, and there are 2 separate keys that do that. I wish I could cover that. And it's also got great code for doing that, where you create the master key and then you create the column level key. And there's a bunch of restrictions on it, and because it involves this .NET library, it's not something you just do in the DDL. You have to either use this wizard, or I believe you can you use PowerShell? I think you can use PowerShell to do this, but basically it's something that you set up in a wizard. Because it's always encrypted, and because it's built into the engine, in theory, your application is totally unaware it's happening. It doesn't require any changes to your application, and to me, that's a great reason to investigate it. What should we stop doing? People do security presentations, and they never talk about what we should stop doing. So we should stop supporting SQL injection. Do you all agree with that? We still do it. How do you stop SQL injection?
Relational mappers.
Okay, relational mappers, that's one thing. One thing is you review your code and you test your code for SQL injection, right? And you protect your parameters. You do all that stuff. But you actually build good development practices against a database that don't even support it. And you test, and you have a monitor, and you use something that tests for this. The unprotected buckets I already talked about. That one's a hard one because it's mostly a person's error, I think you guys called it. In fairness, the people who do this, they usually say something like, I'll delete that. I'm going to put this out on Dropbox. Will you let me know when you got it, and I'll delete it? You guys have said that before, haven't you? With your copy of your passport for your travel agent or something. Do you ever go back and delete it? You're not sure, because the person never lets you know they got it, really. Most of the breaches that I've been reading about aren't because someone in your company did it, but because a vendor did it, or you were providing information to a vendor to debug something or to do something else. And then they shared it with someone else. So it's even outside your control. And I'll talk about how we might fix that, is we don't provide production data to anybody. That's the #1 way to fix that. We'll skip this one for a minute, but here's my rant for 2019, and it's really going to be my rant for 2020 as well. Anyone here at their brother-in-law's, dog sitters, salons, delivery people, ever restore production to development for doing development testing? Anyone not do it? See, here's the thing. It's all against every security thing we've ever known about. Why does your brother-in-law, salons, dog sitters, delivery company do it? Why do they do it? It's easy. Well, it's really because developing your own test data is really hard, right? So why do we keep doing this? Do you know an awful lot of breaches were breaches in development or in test and not in production? Production stayed safe. It was the data that came out of a secure production environment that went into this development environment. So what are we going to do as a profession to stop this? Any ideas? No one wants to because it's so easy, right? Well, so I have this idea. I think we ought to, as a community, develop a whole bunch of test data that everyone can use. What I call the lorem ipsum of data. You know, that's the placeholder text for doing graphic design. We should, as a profession, have the way every database has. So a lot of people have memorized AdventureWorks, and I forget what comes with Oracle and everything, and you've memorized all that fake data. We should have that as a profession for people, places, things, and events, and transactions, and everything. If you could start with that much data, with big data around that, that was totally made up data, we might not have to take a subset of production and put it into development. Because development nowadays, so again, I've been doing this a long time, development used to have its own server so we could lock it down. Where does development happen now? On laptops. Is your laptop, your brother-in-law's laptop, is it really locked down the same way production is? Have I shamed you enough into this? Who's responsible for this? I know it's not you. Why do we do it? Because it's easy? Because we're busy. Because no one's creating test data for us. Do you know there are tools that'll create test data? There are lots of third-party vendors that have it. It takes a long time to create test data, especially test data that actually looks real. So then other people say, oh, don't worry, we mask all the data that we take from production and put it into dev. I'm surprised someone didn't say that here. Do you know in order to actually protect the data, you'd have to mask it so much it wouldn't make any sense anymore? Like literally, you'd have to take a person's name and have all but one letter be masked. And even then, you might be able to figure it out. So I'm on this big kick that to protect data, we need to stop doing that because so many data breaches are happening. So the other thing I try to tell people is, so when I worked on this system where we did use a backup of a database for doing development, is I looked at that data a lot. And all the testers, picked their favorite customers that they used in all their tests. I still have people's information memorized. And if you think about that, you guys might too from your earlier in your career. People and transactions and credit card numbers and all kinds of stuff. I would never do that in production, but because it was development, it was okay. That I knew this customer, I knew where they lived, I knew where they worked, I knew what they bought. And I knew what they were likely to buy next week as well. That's a huge invasion of privacy, and it's a huge security risk. So I don't know how we solve it as a profession other than finding a way to make test data easier. So if anyone's going to start a Kickstarter or go get level 2 funding or something like that, I want in on it because I think it'll solve a big problem. But how do we build this culture of security and privacy? If you bring up, you ever sat in a meeting and someone's talking about doing something and you're thinking, that might not be the right way to do this, or that might not be the right thing to do. Are you afraid of saying it because you know it's going to slow down the project? Ever had that happen? Nobody? Happens to me all the time because I'm a data person. So we should reward that. Like, I don't know how we reward that. Managers and your peers, you should reward your peers who identify threats and risks. Identifying a threat and a risk is not saying, hey, stop this, do that. It's saying, hey, we have this risk here. So I'm on a project team right now where there's this huge resistance to multi-factor authentication. It's just, and I want us to have a rule that if you have admin access to the database, you must suffer through MFA. And there's resistance on behalf of my peers, so much so that management doesn't want to make that a rule. I want to make it a rule. I hate it. When my phone's dead, I can't get into the database. Well, then I have those somewhere. I have the code sitting somewhere, but it's not where I am. So there's that. I think, how would you celebrate someone identifying a risk besides rolling your eyes? Rolling your eyes is celebrating, right? No? That's what I tell my coworkers anyway. I'm celebrating what you just said. So we need to do that. Jerry Weinberg, who wrote this great book called The Secrets of Consulting, which isn't about consulting at all. It's about the art of giving and receiving advice. I highly recommend it. He says, trust everyone, but always cut the deck. That means we should be monitoring each other. We should be looking to see where production data is going. I've seen tickets that people open up that have sensitive data in them. You guys ever seen that before at your brother-in-law's place? Whole snapshots of data, whole JSON files full of sensitive data. You didn't even think your ticketing system, is it well protected against breaches? We need more monitoring and testing of vulnerabilities. One of the things I tell my developers is, I want you to put your own data in your development database, in everyone else's development database on their laptops. They're like, oh, my laptop's safe. It's encrypted. I've got Defender on it, right? Well, put your own data in the database then. Put your credit card number in there. Put your customer ID in there. Put your bank account number in there. You guys all willing to do that in development? Are you? Anyone been a customer of a company you work with? That's okay to say that, right? You haven't been a customer of a company that you work at? Yeah. Do you like how your data's treated there? Just say yes. It's okay. There's a camera. I don't think we should use production data for anything other than production and looking at it to support it. That's my big thing. So that's all I have. I hope I encourage you to go look at things for loving your data and thinking about data and rewarding the identification and risk. Does anyone have any questions? Certainly someone. Anyone have any stories that they heard of? Wait for the mic.
I was doing a production migration project, and I was given the password file of the current production system of, in plain text, of over 100,000 real live people.
Yay!
All their passwords. And I still know some of them, including mine.
That's how you knew it was real, right?
Exactly,
That's how
yeah.
Troy Hunt does it, right? He knows because he sees his own passwords in there.
Yep. I went onto their production system, created an account. There it was a week later.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think I've been in a similar situation. Anybody else have any tricks that you know to make data safer?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
How do you overcome an issue when the data, something to do with production data is wrong, is causing the problem in the application? And the developers are adamant, no, we need this data to fix this problem. You need to give me access to production to fix this problem, that kind of thing. And your DBAs can't fix it because whatever reason.
Yeah, so that's a difficult question because it varies on country, right? So in the US, they have separation of duties laws. I don't know what you have here. Yeah, but it's that whole thing about I've often had to sit with 3 people and the security officer while someone drove and we sat around and did it. And it really is the team thing about, if you can replicate it with non-production data, if no one can replicate it, then you have to go look at the production data, and you'll find out it's the code anyway. I just made that up, most likely. Yeah. Yeah, like one last question.
In answer to that question, not saying that we do it currently, because what I'm planning on doing is break glass accounts, to get access, fully audited,
Yes.
read and write.
Yeah.
So that you've got some form of audit trail that data's even been looked at.
Yes.
Right?
And why.
And why.
Yeah, and tools to do it. I know that I have to force a lot of my clients. I specifically put in my contract, you will not give me access to production data. Like, literally, they're all like, oh, well, we'll give you SA because you're going to work on the database. Nope, don't want it. Don't want any access. That's an experienced person that doesn't want access to production. Anyway, we're at the end of time, but I'm around to talk, and I plan on being around to drink as well. I hope you guys will be that too. I'd love to hear your stories if you want to tell them more privately. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen.